Hello, I'm Sarah. I'm the Emerging Trends and Training Coordinator at Crew 2000 in Edinburgh. That's a really long job title, but I'm sure we'll talk through it as the day goes on. Basically, I look at emerging trends across Scotland along with Morgan, who will introduce himself in a second. And from that emerging trends data that we gather across Scotland and the rest of the UK, we put together training, we put together harm reduction strategies, and then share that information across any training that we do and in our resources that we create at Crew 2000. And I will hand over to Morgan to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Morgan. As Sarah said, I'm the Training Development Officer at Crew 2000 in Edinburgh. I help to develop a lot of our training and I do a lot of comms work as well. So a lot of the graphic design you'll see today was put together, at least in part by me, although to be honest, I can't take all the credit because a lot of it comes from our graphic designer. But I like to help with our training, developing our resources, putting together new training courses, one of which will be mentioned later on today, which there will be opportunities to sign up for too. And also producing information for social media and for going out to nightlife environments where we take harm reduction onto the ground and try to support people at festivals and at venues and events.
Okay, so we're going to start with a question to fire into the chat. This might be a lot because there's a lot of people here. What drugs are you hearing about? Wherever you're based, and you can actually put roughly where you're based. You don't have to tell me exact specifics. Don't expect postcodes. But what drugs are you hearing about at the moment? What are the current trends? This might be with people you're working with or people that you might know. You don't need to be that specific with that too. But what are we hearing about? I'm seeing a lot of ketamine being written down as the first number of messages are coming in. Ketamine, nitazines, pink cocaine is a new one.
That's interesting. Pink cocaine.
Spice, oxycodone and vapes, THC vapes, ketamine, alcohol, cannabis and ket.
Some 2CB in there as well.
Increasing interest in psychedelics. I've seen quite a significant increase in psychedelic drug checking results, actually, LSD specifically within parts of the UK, I think Midlands mostly, I think. Ketamine, 2CB, cannabis, ketamine, THC, MDMA, nitrous oxide. That's a bit of a surprise. Benzos, ketamine, aerosols, MDMA. So a mix, a big mix.
Yeah, I suppose the funny thing about nitrous oxide, isn't it, is that like even though it was subject to greater controls, we've been seeing that galaxy gas stuff showing up, haven't we?
Yeah, we've had an awful lot of inquiries about galaxy gas, and that's obviously changed a lot of people asking questions about it, inquiring what galaxy gas is, what it means, and then we've had to provide information on nitrous oxide, the same harm reduction. Thankfully, we've got plenty of information available that we can share. Pregabalin and large NOS canisters being left lying around. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. If anybody wants to add anything else in the chat as we're talking, feel free. You can do so. The chat is open. Or if you have any questions, as we said by Fiona. Okay. This is Crew. I'm pointing, I know you can't see me, but this is Crew. So we have a physical location in Edinburgh City Centre on Coburn Street. So it's just up from the train station at Waverley Station. It is physically there as a drop-in for anybody who needs it for sexual health, harm reduction in general. If they have any questions, if they want any support, if they want any of our wonderful resources to take away, they can go in and get any of those things, as well as sanitary products and any sexual health testing at specific times where we have an external partner that come in and do that. We also have pregnancy testing available as well. It's open Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. No, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, 1 till 5, and then Thursday is 3 till 7. There's easier ways to say that, but I found the difficult one. And we have a digital drop-in as well. Morgan, do you want to take over?
Sure. So digital drop-in, you can contact us from anywhere. And if it's a question about sexual health or drugs, you can come in and get your information that way online. If you are based in Edinburgh, we do have a counselling service. There is a bit of a waiting list at the minute, but coming into the drop-in, speaking to us there, it's a great way of getting to know us. And potentially, you know, if there's any small things we can do to support you there, that's what we'll do. And then, as I sort of touched upon before, we go out to nightlife events and do things there. Now, Crew actually began quite a wee while ago in the 1990s. We began as a group of ravers, a group of friends, activists who were really keen to try and tackle drug-related harm that was appearing in the dance scene, in the rave scene in Edinburgh in the 1990s. And that's because we had all these drugs that were appearing that people didn't really know much about. They were drugs where it was actually quite important to have harm reduction information for, but due to the conditions of the world at that time during the war on drugs and what have you, there wasn't a lot of information out there for people to know what would be a safe way or a safer way to take their drugs. There wasn't a lot of information about how to reduce the risks. And so what Crew did is they went out and they handed out literature, they handed out harm reduction resources, a lot of them that had been drawn by themselves, little comic strip type resources explaining different bits of harm reduction, including for jellies, so for benzodiazepines, and also for MDMA and for amphetamine. And you can see a couple of them in there within a newspaper snippet as well. If you were to flash forward to today, we've come a long way. Our graphics look a little bit more airbrushed now, which I attribute to the discovery of Canva. We've been doing all sorts of work, and you can see there down at the bottom left, there's me in Fife with some residential school workers doing a training session. At the bottom right, you can see one of our chill out spaces at a music festival in the Scottish Central Belt, where we were providing support to people who were going raving that day and for that weekend, actually. At the top left, there was some work we did with the Be Sound campaign, delivering harm reduction, bite-sized harm reduction messaging to people between the 18 and 25 age category who were going to hard dance events in Glasgow, which was a really fun and enjoyable project. Where we got a lot of feedback from, and we had a bit of an impact on the sort of culture and the community. At the top, we had our nightlife harm reduction coordinator presenting information about ketamine to the Club Health Conference in Ghent, which was a really, really great thing, building off of research that we'd been doing with Dr. Krenzimer in Newcastle. And finally, at the top right, that is kind of the inside of our drop-in. So if you ever come in and you want to have a chat with us, that's where we'll be. So keep that in mind. Now, why I say all this is because the next part, what we're going to talk about, are some drug trends that we've collected through our activities at Crew. So
Morgan, you've been muted. I don't know how you've been muted, but you were muted.
Oh, sorry, where did I get to? Is it just there?
Drug trends at Crew.
Drug trends at Crew. So the first of our drug trends that we collect at Crew is our nightlife drug trends. And so as you can see down the bottom right there, where we have our harm reduction chill out space, we go around and we speak to people who've come in and we try to get them to complete a survey. Here are the results of our survey for 2025. Now, there may be some kind of biases within the research. Some people really, really like to speak to us. And so it's maybe not such a surprise that MDMA is the second most popular drug taken on the day of our survey. Those of you who are familiar with the effects of MDMA will know that it increases feelings of social connectedness and empathy, and also the reward for participating was a free lollipop. So there are many reasons why we may have had greater engagement from some groups than others, but generally speaking, this is a picture of the different drugs that people were taking at nightlife events in 2025 who we spoke to in our chill out space. So you can see alcohol by far the most popular, and that's not such a surprise. But then you see MDMA, cannabis, cocaine, and ketamine. Oh, on.
I was resharing it.
There we go. So you can see alcohol, MDMA, cannabis, cocaine, and ketamine, but that's on the day that the survey was taken. So there's some further insights that we can get from this. Now, first of all, it's worth considering that most of the people who were taking our survey were between the ages of 18 and 30, so a relatively young demographic. There are people from all over, people coming from Europe to come to some of these festivals, people coming from down south in England, and people coming from the rural areas of Scotland, the Highlands, the borders. But most people were from the Scottish Central Belt. We had people from kind of all over, Fife, Lanarkshire. What's interesting is if you exclude the today results, you can see that drugs taken ever also includes cannabis and cocaine being the two more popular drugs, excluding alcohol. So while MDMA was the most popular on the day, if you look at what was taken ever, the results are a little bit different. And you can see that ketamine is actually quite high up as well, and that's been growing in recent years. Even though people have maybe been taking ketamine less at nightlife events, they have been recorded to have taken it before more than previously. So it's becoming more popular in different settings. Outside of nightlife, we also have statistics we gather from our drop-in, which is where people come in to get advice from drugs, to sexual health, to mental health at our Coburn Street shop. You can see that the drugs talked about are a little bit different. Now, it's worth saying, first of all, these are brief interventions. So these are very specific supportive conversations that we have with people where we identify that there might be some harm going on and that we could potentially intervene to provide some better information and some more holistic support to try and put that person, to get them to reduce potential harms without necessarily having a very major intervention like counselling or having a drug support worker. So small, brief conversations is what these drugs were recorded as part of. You can see cannabis by far the most popular, but then opioids were the second most popular, cocaine, naloxone, which is a life-saving opioid reversal medicine, alcohol, benzodiazepines, and ketamine. Now, the age category for our drop-in is much, much broader. We have people coming in from as young as 13, and really people of all ages older than that as well, as it is a place that's open to anybody on Coburn Street, right in the middle of Edinburgh, next to Edinburgh Waverley, so right in the middle of the city centre. So we have all kinds of people. And you can see that there's maybe some drugs talked about here, which we wouldn't see so much in nightlife, and vice versa. And I'm going to hand over to Sarah to talk about drug checking results, which is another angle of drug trends that we can talk about.
Amazing. Sorry, I was putting so many things in the chat. I was going to start talking about naloxone and the drop-in because, again, this year for our data, it's one of the top drugs being discussed in our drop-in for brief interventions. But I don't need to type that in the chat anymore because I've just said it. Okay, drug checking results. So I decided to do a little bit of homework and look over our drug checking results across the UK rather than a specific region ahead of today. So I thought I'd look to see what had happened in 2026 so far, what had been put into WEDNOS. Now, obviously, across this chat, a lot of you will be familiar that this isn't everything. A lot of people that we work with are likely to not submit drugs for checking, whether that is because they may not necessarily know about drug checking. They may not necessarily want to take the time that it takes to get results back before taking their drugs. It may be that they may not be directly linked to services. It's not every bit of information that we have available to us. So it's really difficult to say that this is everything. However, it does give us general trend information to see if there's anything, kind of happening across our areas. So within parts of Scotland, this was what I got so far. So, Aberdeen, very up north, we had pregabalin that was submitted. Turns out it was pregabalin on this occasion. Isn't always the case, but on this situation it was. And what I think is Motherwell postcode. This is testing my postal code knowledge. We had a sample that was submitted. Purchase intent was heroin. What actually came back was, well, there was heroin within the sample, but there was also a synthetic opioid and a metabolite of heroin, precursors of opioids, cough suppressants, paracetamol, caffeine, and something else, papaverine. That's something else that's found within opium poppy, differs from other variants. So yeah, it relaxes muscles. So you've got different things within that sample that you wouldn't expect if you were purchasing heroin, because that's what you're expecting to find. So obviously that result, we'll go on to talk about synthetic opioids later on, but that potentially could be really quite a risky situation because it's got so many other things in it, but also having that synthetic opioid within that mix means it actually is a high risk for drug-related harm or something potentially worse. Okay, moving quickly on. Postcodes that are somewhat a little bit less known to me because they're not within my area. So we've got one that was submitted that was ketamine. Turns out it was actually ketamine, but we are finding a significant amount. As everybody said in the chat this morning when we asked, what drugs are you finding in your area? What are you familiar with or what are you hearing about most? Ketamine, a lot of the samples in the drug checking results most recently, what's been submitted is ketamine. Some of the analysis, though, some of them is ketamine. Actually, quite a lot of it is, but that isn't to say that it's guaranteed it would be. We are finding that some are mixes, some have ketamine and cocaine, ketamine and MDMA, but this one turns out it was just ketamine. We had one sample that was a nitazene. That was the purchase intent, was a synthetic opioid. It was a very specific nitazene. Nitazenes range in terms of their potency. We'll talk about that later on. And then finally, diazepam was the purchase intent. And what the actual analysis concluded was it wasn't diazepam, so it wasn't Valium. It was ethylbromazole and bromazole mixed. And obviously, benzos range in terms of their experience and potency, the strength and tolerance. So, like I was saying at the very start of this whole discussion point, drug checking really is quite important, quite valuable. People don't always submit things. So that's why our harm reduction information and what we share is really, really important, because if people aren't going to submit drug checking and find out what's in their drugs, when the purchase intents versus the analysis is so vastly different, it's important for us to say, well, actually, okay, drug checking might not be available in your area, might not be easy to get a hold of. So what else can you do that will help reduce the risks in order to help when this isn't available to you or when this isn't possible. So that's what we're going to talk about today. That's the key takeaways of today. So the drug trends that we're going to focus on, we've got ketamine that we're going to talk about first. We've got cocaine and crack cocaine, benzodiazepines and GABAs or gabapentinoids, then nitazenes, and then finally we've got xylazine, medetomidine, and detomidine. That's our main topics for today. And I will hand over to Morgan for this next point.
So just a tiny bit of extra information. These are our drug trends for today. I noticed you've mentioned so many interesting subjects that we wish we could talk about. Would love to talk more about 2CB, pink cocaine, spice, etc., but we simply don't have the time. However, we will give you a little bit of a taster into the grand expanse of drugs. This is the drug wheel. Throughout today, we're going to be talking about a couple of different drugs. We're going to be talking about, as Sarah said, including ket, cocaine, benzos, nitazenes, and some sedative type drugs. So you can see here, the drug wheel, it dives into different categories of drugs. And so we may refer to things like stimulants or dissociatives or depressants or opioids. What we're referring to is broad categories of drugs. Now, if you ever do want to get a little bit more information about what these categories are and what they mean, you can absolutely get in contact with us. I'm sure these slides will also be going out to everyone in the training today. So if you do ever want to take a bit of a deep dive into the drug wheel, come to some future training, get in touch with us. We'd be happy to talk through it all. But today we are just going to focus on a few. So just for keeping in mind, if there is anything that you're kind of wanting to learn a bit more about the effects of, the drug wheel can do a lot to help to explain the difference between certain drugs. For example, why is ketamine different to heroin? What is it that makes them so different? What is it that's so different about these two drug categories? That's where the drug wheel comes in. Speaking of ketamine, I think it's about time we talked about it.
Yes. Okay. I guess that's me. I'm up. There's a question in the chat. I'll let that go over to Morgan to answer. And I'll talk about ketamine. So ketamine's been talked about quite a lot recently, especially in the news, but also a lot of people are obviously hearing a lot about it in terms of people taking it, especially young people, but not just young people. Why? I think that's a first question. There's actually quite a lot of availability of ketamine. It's quite cheap and it's quite easy to get hold of. And I think that's probably a big part of it. If we're really talking about it in a very fundamental way, it's readily available, it's quite cheap. And as far as drugs go, that is probably why it's around as much as it is. It's a dissociative drug. It can be taken in a variety of settings. I'll move on to my next slide actually, so you can see a little bit more. We see it a lot in nightlife settings, as Morgan was saying earlier, party settings, chill out spaces. But also, we are hearing an awful lot of people that are taking it in general. It's most often taken in bumps or lines. It does appear, you can maybe see it in that picture, even when it is powdered down and ground down, it still has like shard-like crystals. So it still has that sort of crystally powder, which means it's kind of sharp. Currently, under the Misuse of Drugs Act, it is a Class B, with a caveat of if prepared for injection, it becomes a Class A. However, it is currently potentially being reviewed, and so we'll find out if it's still a Class B or whether it is reviewed and whether that changes. However, right now, Class B. I think there is a lot of why do people take ketamine? That's a question we get asked a lot because young people are taking it. A lot of people are taking it. Why do people take ketamine? So one of the biggest reasons we can think of is because of what it feels like. And when we talk to people at festivals, like, why have you taken ketamine? They say it's because of what it makes them feel like. When they're on a small dose, a light dose, makes them feel quite floaty, disinhibited, relaxed, a little bit stimulated, but quite buzzed. And that's the experience that they're wanting to have, that experience with ketamine. When they take a slightly higher dose, or if they take multiple doses, but smaller doses, that's when we start to see the sort of uncoordinated, struggling to walk, feeling kind of melted, pain relief, memory loss, difficulty moving, altered perception. Then when it comes to higher doses or multiple doses over a short period of time, especially when there's memory loss and they may have forgotten they've taken a dose and then take another dose, then we start to see out-of-body experiences, the dissociation, hallucination, and K-holes. I want you to maybe use the raise the hand function. How many people have seen someone within a K-hole or seen a K-hole before? I'm surprised, Morgan, you've not got your raise your hand feature on. There we go. So quite a few people. I remember the first time we were at a festival and I had never seen it before. I was completely oblivious, and I'll explain what a K-hole is. I'd never seen it, and there was just this young person who had came into our tent, and it was a sort of chill out space, and they weren't really moving. Their eyes were really big, but kind of unable to focus, and I didn't really know what had happened. I was a little bit worried, but the person I was with was like, "Oh no, they're fine. They've probably taken ketamine." And when we spoke to their friend, they were like, "Yeah, they've taken ketamine. Taken quite a significant amount of ketamine. They're all right." Everything was fine in terms of their vitals. They'd been checked out. They were fine. They just, put them in a recovery position, checked on them. They are able to hear you. You can talk. I always sort of say that I practice my stand-up routine. Like, I will talk at them. I'll say, like, "You're here, you're in our chill out space. I'm Sarah, I'm going to keep checking on you. You're okay, you're safe." Because someone in that situation is quite vulnerable. They physically can't move. They don't really have much control over their limbs. And yet, the thing is, they actually are there. Like, as was put in the chat, like, they're actually there. They, they're just, their brain's a bit floaty. And so we generally check on them, talk to them and stuff. When they're within our chill out space, we will monitor them and make sure it doesn't get any worse. And we'll make sure that there's nothing really affecting them. Because if there's other things going on, if they've taken a really high dose, or if they've mixed it with something else, there is concerns. But, a lot of the time, it's a dose that they've accidentally taken just a little bit too much, and they'll be okay. And give them about 90 minutes and they're grand. Okay, moving quickly on. Snorting harm reduction. We'll talk about snorting harm reduction quite quickly. Crushed powders, finally, as I said earlier, it is like little shards of crystals, so snorting it. Avoiding keys and banknotes. They're not sterile, they're not clean. So paper straws, Post-its, things that are single use, and then don't share equipment. Obviously there's a risk of BBVs, but as we say a lot of the time, it's not just about BBVs, although that's very important. It's also things like you don't want to share a cold. because that's a little bit more relatable to people than a BBV, because that's something that's going to happen to someone else or in the distance, or, you know, whereas a cold's pretty common, and, you know, nobody wants one of them either. Also, you don't want to have cuts forming inside your nose and then sharing anything worse. Clean out your nose at the end of a session. There are neti pots that you can get, and use sterile water. K-pods. This is a relatively new thing we hear all the time at the moment, which is the idea of a ketamine vape or a K-pod. So just to put this here, in terms of ketamine vapes, we are pretty, we don't think there's ketamine vapes. When we have done or are aware of testing, ketamine vapes, I'm using, you know, air quotes, are found to contain etomidate rather than ketamine. Ketamine itself, when heated, can be quite unpredictable and tends to degrade. There are certain caveats around that. There was a study that found that a type of ketamine could be heated. However, in terms of generally speaking, for putting it in vapes, we haven't found any evidence to support that. We have, however, found evidence of etomidate being sold as ketamine vapes. We've found that across Thailand, across Europe, and in parts of the UK. So, for etomidate vapes being sold or missold as ketamine or K-pods, what you need to know is etomidate is a sedative. It is mimicking the side effects of ketamine, which is why it can be missold quite easily as ketamine vapes. It's unpredictable, again, when vaped. The dose, the strength, purity, very unclear. For people that are taking it, they have reported that they don't necessarily feel very well. They don't know if it is obviously this etomidate or if it's THC vape. They've reported experiences that are different from their expectations and undesired effects, so not feeling very good at all afterwards, and a lot of vomiting for the people that have felt that this is what they've taken. So just to put this out here in a wide forum. Okay, moving into the main thing that people talk about when it comes to ketamine, the sort of bladder and neurological issues. K-cramps. K-cramps are probably the sort of early warning sign that most people report when it comes to taking ketamine. So abdominal pain, aches and discomfort. Ketamine being metabolized, processed in the liver and kidneys, causes damage. People report having problems and having that pain. It is one of the early warning signs, like I said. And when people are starting to struggle with this, it's a good idea to get it seen to and to report it to their GP and try and get some support as soon as possible before they start to have regular bladder-related issues. UTIs and things would be one of the other signs that they'll start to have. Early intervention is one of the things that we are advising people, because the earlier you speak to somebody, whether it's a pharmacist, a harm reduction service, or your GP, it's really important. Speak to medical staff, talk to them about what's happening. They can provide things like anti-inflammatories, pain management, but also make a referral to urology if that's needed. If it's done earlier, then the chances are there's not going to be long-term impact, but the later it is done, the risk of irreversible damage to the bladder most significantly, but also to things like your liver and your kidneys. What we obviously are hearing about a lot of the time right now is people that have had the sort of frequent UTIs, that have had the K-cramps and issues with bladder blockages and a lot of pain or blood when they're urinating, struggling to hold in their urine, and incontinence, and they're speaking to their GP. We've also heard the sort of horror stories of individuals that are peeing or urinating, and they're having a sort of jelly-like consistency, and at that point, when they are seeking support, the damage can be irreversible, and obviously it's leading to sort of surgical interventions. So the sooner someone can speak to a GP and get a referral, the best chance they have of not having that level of damage. So that's the advice that we're providing at the moment. In terms of harm reduction for ketamine, we are saying, obviously, monitor how frequently somebody is taking it. If people are taking ketamine, plan the doses in advance to try and reduce the likelihood of redosing and therefore having a K-hole situation, because there's still risks of like injury and things like that, and vulnerabilities as people described in the chat. I was saying it and trying not to see it so much while I was talking, but there's vulnerabilities when people don't know how to get somewhere or don't know how they've injured themselves, especially when they are in environments that might not necessarily be the safest for them. So trying to ensure their own safety within that situation, but also if they are taking ketamine, to make sure that they taper off in a trauma-informed way, signpost to services, try and think about the route of administration. We talked about snorting specifically because that's what we're hearing about the most at the moment. Thinking about things like BBVs, single-use equipment, mixing risk factors when mixed, referrals for that early intervention to try and reduce the risk of long-term or irreversible damage. And that's me finished talking about ketamine, and I will hand over to Morgan to talk about cocaine and crack cocaine.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So cocaine, this is huge, actually. Cocaine is really, really big at the moment, especially in Scotland. It is the #1 drug that is appearing in our drug-related death statistics at the moment. It's becoming more and more and more popular with quite a real broad range of people. So what is it? Cocaine is a short-lasting stimulant drug. It falls into our stimulant drug category, and along with other stimulants that we may be familiar with, it increases confidence and ego, it increases your energy, lowers your inhibitions, and it can increase sexual arousal. It can do the opposite as well. It can make you sexually impotent for the duration of taking it, and so there can be quite unpredictable effects. As with all drugs, the effect of a drug does depend on not just the drug itself, but how it's taken, who's taking it, and where it's taken, and what the context of all these different environments are. In other words, your drug set and setting. So that's something to consider. Now, the key risks of cocaine, because it is a very short-lasting stimulant drug, which produces quite a rush, it's also very expensive. You've got issues around debt, indebtedness, spending more than you thought you would because you end up taking more than you thought you would. It can cause trouble sleeping after a session. Trying to get to sleep in the early hours of the morning when you've still got cocaine in your system, especially if you've been mixing it with alcohol, is a bit of a nightmare. It can cause damage to relationships, especially if it's taken repeatedly, and in situations where people are worried about someone, or that's affecting their relationships, affecting maybe their work, affecting their social life. It can cause a loss of appetite, and there is a risk of stimulant overdose. So if we were to think about the main feature of cocaine, the main thing that it's most known for, that would probably be frequent dosing. So as I said, it is a drug that produces a rush. When it's taken it comes with quite a strong urge to redose, and the effects of cocaine don't last very long. So you may have somebody who takes cocaine and they're on top of the world. They are out uptown. They are having the best time ever. They feel like they're the king. They're on top. That's not going to last too long. So they're going to need to go and have another bump, and they're going to need to keep redosing. And as the session goes on, tolerance will build. So they're either going to need to dose more frequently or dose more throughout the session in order to chase that peak, that kind of high they had at the beginning. Now, when you continually take cocaine during a session in one sitting in larger amounts over a longer period of time, that's going to make the come down worse. It's going to make it harder to maintain the high, and the effects the next day on mental health, on the body, are going to be worse. Now, we're seeing, as well as cocaine, in Edinburgh at least, and in parts of Scotland, methamphetamine is becoming a little bit more popular too. And we're seeing a general trend of people moving towards stimulants. So, for example, methamphetamine-related deaths in 2024 were the highest number that they've been since records began in Scotland. We also, in our own counselling service, have recorded an increase of counselling clients coming to Crewe to speak about methamphetamine. Now, if we were to compare cocaine and methamphetamine and amphetamine, which you might better know as speed, not as popular as it used to be, you can see very clearly that cocaine, its distinct character is that it has a very short length of effect. So that lends itself to repeated dosing and, a bit like ketamine, potential damage to the nose. If somebody is not observing the safest or safer snorting practices, if somebody's maybe not looking after themselves, or if they're taking lots and lots of cocaine, then over time there can be damage to the nose if they're snorting it. Something else to consider about powder cocaine that I've kind of alluded to is cocaine and alcohol. In our nightlife settings, we do tend to see cocaine being taken alongside alcohol. There's so many reasons why people might do this. We've heard reports that people take cocaine with alcohol because it makes them feel more in control when they're drunk. It makes them maybe spend less money on alcohol, which is getting more and more expensive when they combine the two. But the key thing that we say is if you do combine cocaine and alcohol, the risk is that you're not actually any less drunk, even if you feel more in control. The physiological effects of the alcohol are still there. They just might not be as noticeable. So the kind of harm that alcohol does to your body, it's still going to be there. And if you continually consume alcohol and cocaine at the same time, those are both going to have an impact on your body in a way which is not very healthy for you. In addition to this, when cocaine and alcohol are consumed together, within the liver, a third chemical substance is formed called cocaethylene. This is something that we're still learning about. We still don't really know a great deal about this. There's still studies into it. But what we do know is that it's more toxic than cocaine or alcohol on their own. It's produced in the liver up to 2 hours after cocaine and alcohol have been consumed, and it can actually stay in the body for 3 times longer than cocaine can on its own. So what does that mean? That means, among many other things, when you're trying to get to sleep in the early hours of the morning, it's going to make it a lot harder. Cocaethylene presents more risk to the heart than cocaine alone. So cocaine as a stimulant, as is the same with methamphetamine and amphetamine, and even with MDMA, it stimulates the central nervous system, it increases your heart rate, it increases blood pressure. So cocaethylene does that as well to a greater extent. So there's going to be more risks to the heart as a result of consuming large amounts of cocaine and alcohol. Both drugs also decrease your inhibitions. So chances of doing things that you might regret, taking risks, or engaging in antisocial behavior may increase. This also relates to what we were saying about sex and increased arousal from cocaine. When you combine that with alcohol, we already know the effects of alcohol, that when these two things are combined, risky sexual behavior might be more likely, such as unprotected sex or unsafe sex, which could lead to potentially injury or the spreading of STIs or other issues surrounding that. And finally, when you do have cocaine being taken in a large amount alongside alcohol in a large amount, that's just going to make the hangover so much worse. So if you already have a bad come down, or if you already have a bad hangover, you're layering something else on top of that, which is just going to have a bad knock-on effect on your mood and your self-care needs. So when people are planning and they're set on taking both, our advice is take less of both than you would usually of either. Beyond cocaine in nightlife settings with alcohol and powdered cocaine, we also have cocaine that's being injected. Now, this is something which I don't know if this is necessarily something we're seeing across the entirety of the UK, but definitely in Scotland, we've seen a shift from the injecting of heroin towards the injecting of cocaine. So last year, we opened up our Glasgow safer injecting facility, a place where people could come, inject their drugs, and have medical staff on hand, have contact with services, and hopefully reduce the amount of bloodborne virus infections and increase the amount of people who are accessing harm reduction services. What we observed was that the majority of people who were using the service were actually injecting cocaine. And you can see up there from data collected by Public Health Scotland how heroin injection trends have moved towards cocaine. This is concerning because cocaine injecting is actually generally considered to be the more dangerous form of taking cocaine. And that's because when it's injected, there's all kinds of risks around your veins. Because cocaine is a vasoconstrictor, it's more likely to collapse veins, meaning that it's going to be harder to access veins for injecting. It also means that things like bloodborne virus transmission, which already is a danger increased by the effect of a stimulant on increasing sexual arousal. We also have the factor of potentially reusing needles or sharing needles or using dirty needles. So that's a worry for us. Now, within that population, we also have people who may take crack cocaine. So we kind of have two types of cocaine. We've got cocaine hydrochloride, which is the kind of cocaine that can be snorted. That's the one that people are combining with alcohol on nights out. But then we also have crack cocaine, which is a type of cocaine that can be smoked. So you may be familiar with the term of a crack pipe. That's a type of cocaine that can be smoked at a very, very high temperature. And then we also have crack cocaine being injected, which is a little bit different to how powdered cocaine is injected, but still it is another way that it is taken. Right now in the UK, it's not very possible. In fact, it's not possible, not legally, to provide safer inhalation pipes. So when people are smoking crack, which we would consider to be a safer way of taking cocaine than injecting it, a lot of people are needing to improvise and produce their own crack pipes. You can see there at the bottom is a makeshift crack pipe that was found in the Glasgow area, where somebody has found an inhaler or they've taken an inhaler and they have attached aluminium foil to it and poked holes in it. Now, there's so many risks to your health from this. Whereas at the top you have something that's glass, a plastic inhaler, when you're combining that with heat at a very high temperature, you're releasing intoxicants, you're potentially getting foil into the lungs that's coming off that little apparatus there. And towards the end of a session, if somebody is trying to recycle crack cocaine residue that is gathered around the side of the inhaler, that's potentially putting plastic shavings into the cocaine as well, which they might then be smoking. So the risks of COPD are getting much, much worse in that situation. fortunately, if you are working in a support service or you are working with clients who do smoke crack cocaine, even though we don't have safer inhalation kits available yet due to the Misuse of Drugs Act, that might be something that comes in future. There is a really good guide by With You about how somebody can smoke crack with just foil and a straight shooter. This is completely possible to acquire. A lot of injecting equipment providers will hand out aluminium foil to support people who may be taking crack cocaine. And I suppose we can just hope that in future we will have better access to these harm reduction options. Now, I'm thinking, Sarah, shall we take a quick 5-minute break just before we jump into the next bit when we talk about benzodiazepines and GABAs, just so that people can take a moment to kind of let everything sink in.
Yep. I'm just responding to questions. But yes, we can. Everybody else has returned, so
I'm
we can
here.
just we've got people.
I'm here.
Yay! Amazing. Okay. Resisting the urge to answer questions in the chat. I answered one and then I thought, no, come on, back to it. Okay. Benzodiazepines and gabapentinoids. I always get the ones with the really long names. Okay, so benzodiazepines I know came up a little bit earlier on, but certainly it is probably one of the collection of drugs that we see an awful lot in Scotland. So there obviously are different types of benzodiazepines, and within that there are different subcategories. So we talk about benzodiazepines in terms of prescribable benzodiazepines, so the ones that obviously a GP can prescribe. Street benzos, which are the ones that we tend to find that can be, like we've seen earlier on actually, where people have found something completely different, but it's ones that actually can't be prescribed. They weren't meant to be prescribed, they're just things that have found themselves in our market. And then fake benzodiazepines, which look very real, but actually are not. They come in packaging, a lot of the time blister packs, but they are not, they're just sort of mimics. They're not real. They're not real exactly what they say. So what are benzodiazepines? Let's break that down, make it a little bit more simple, a little bit more straightforward. Benzodiazepines, the main things that they tend to do are either relieve anxiety or help someone sleep, sleep-inducing, or a mixture of both of those things. Prescribable benzodiazepines, the main ones that we see are things like Valium or diazepam. We do have our street benzos. Terrible description that I done, but our main one that we tend to find at the moment actually is things like bromazolam, although that's starting to be replaced a little bit more with ethylbromazolam. For a while it was atizolam. We do occasionally still see things like atizolam pop up in the market. Wasn't prescribable. We didn't see it coming from GPs. It was just something that was being sort of manufactured and was within our street market. And then fake benzodiazepines, they look legitimate, they look real, but they actually are generally bromazolam in different packaging. So that tends to be what we're finding within our benzodiazepam, our benzodiazepam market. Okay. Benzodiazepine market. In terms of benzodiazepine
I'll just go listen to it in here.
Oh, there are people. There are multiple people talking. Okay, in terms of benzodiazepines, the main thing that we have to think about is drug-related harm. We see quite a lot of drug-related deaths with benzos, especially in Scotland, but also in the rest of the UK. And a lot of that is down to them being mixed with other things. When they're mixed with other depressants like opioids, alcohol, and even things like GHB, GBL, because they slow things down, they slow down your heart rate, they slow down your breathing. If you also take it with a depressant, another thing that will slow things down, you're increasing the strain that it's putting on your respiratory system. If you take it with stimulant drugs, it increases the strain on your cardiovascular system, but it can also be quite unpredictable. So it's important to think about when they're being mixed with other things. We do know that a lot of the time mixing can be unintentional. So like when we looked at the check-in results earlier on, sometimes the purchase intent might be, I don't know, heroin, and what they end up with is heroin, a benzodiazepine, a synthetic opioid, and a stimulant all in the same result. So they aren't intending to take a benzo and an opioid and another depressant and something else. So it's an unintentional mixing. And so it is worth talking about. Actually, there is an importance to drug checking, but as Morgan has just said, taking a smaller amount than you'd normally take, seeing how it feels, making sure you've got people with you, making sure you're not alone, because actually it's important that we are aware of the risk of harm when it comes to benzodiazepines, when they are unintentionally being mixed as well as when somebody is intentionally mixing with them. Okay, this is probably one of the harder parts of today's session, and it will get mentioned a few times, but benzodiazepines are obviously implicated in a significant amount of drug-related deaths, especially in Scotland. So talking about specifically Scotland at the moment, all benzos, they're implicated normally in about anywhere between 55 and 65%. I think last year we had, now Morgan, your memory of this information is probably better than mine's, but I feel like we had 50, I'll get the exact number. I'll actually get the specific number and I'll put it in the chat of the specific amount of people, because I think the amount of people is more important than the percentage. But we have a specific amount for last year, because this obviously only goes up to 2024, when it comes to benzo drug-related deaths, depressant-related deaths. And I think it's really important to think about it, not just in terms of percentages and numbers, but also in terms of people. When it comes to benzos, it's normally about the same in terms of our benzos, which is why it's really important for us to continue to think about them and talk about them. Okay, we're going to move on to an actual activity, which it's going to be quite difficult because there's 152 people here, but we're going to do it with the raise the hand function. This is 2 lies and a truth. 2 of these statements are untrue. One of them is actually true. So which one? So diazepam, Valium bought online that is in medication packaging is most likely legitimate. Alprazolam, Xanax, is not prescribed in the NHS in the UK, and clonazepam, Klonopin, is prescribed for stabilising someone as part of benzodiazepine treatment. Which one of these statements is true? I'm just going to say the numbers. Raise your hand if you think that is the true statement. Number 1. Oh, I was moving too quickly. Number 2. I hope you're keeping an eye on the numbers here, Morgan. And then number 3. Okay. Who won that, Morgan?
Well, 2 and 3 were, I thought, a bit tied. I did miss number one.
Yeah. I kind of thought it was between 2 and 3, actually. I'm not quite sure, but I feel like it was quite equal between them. Okay. Well, I can tell you, number 2. Number 2 is the thing that is true. Number 1, diazepam, Valium, bottom line, and medication packaging is most likely legit. Not true. In terms of our statistics, it's actually really less than ideal. For one particular set of data that we had from 2025, of the 155 samples, 40% of diazepam was legitimate, which means 60% was not legitimate within Scotland. Within the rest of the UK, it was slightly better, but not much better. Your diazepam Valium market, it's I think about 60% of it was accurate, but still that's not great. It's not good. So importance of drug checking, but also importance of it. Benzodiazepine market, I would say, is incredibly unreliable. And when something is in packaging, I think a lot of the time people will assume, well, it's in a blister pack. It's in a box. It's got a label that even says a high street pharmacy on it. Well, it has to be real. But they're very easy to make and manufacture and copy that. So it's actually quite scary, but also doesn't make it real. And even within a blister pack, because these pills are made anywhere, the differences in dose between the pills, even within a blister pack, can be really, really different. And so it is quite startling for people when they aren't real or legitimate. That's some good advice from Asha in the chat. So I think drug checking, and also, as Morgan said earlier, take a small amount, see how it feels. I'll go back to I'll just go in number order. Alprazolam Xanax, not prescribed in the NHS in the UK. It can be prescribed privately in limited circumstance, but within the NHS, within the UK, not prescribed. Clonazepam, Klonopin, being prescribed for stabilising someone as part of benzodiazepine treatment? No. Diazepam is generally prescribed for stabilising someone by GPs because it's seen as less risky than others. Clonazepam is actually prescribed within epilepsy treatment for some people within limited circumstances. It has many warnings and precautions, and there's very specific monitoring and guidance for GPs that are using clonazepam or Klonopin. However, that may be under revision because Klonopin has become a drug that a lot of people currently are hearing about and talking about online at the moment as part of increasing discussions. I think Klonopin's became something that we are hearing a lot about at the moment, or K-pins, from about maybe 2 winters ago. So I don't know if that will change or be revised. Okay, just an add-on with final point with benzos. The Benzo Research Project is undertaking a new research project to better understand lived and living experience. They have done this before and it was incredible. And they looked at young people's experiences of benzodiazepines. The testimonials was really important and significant for helping us better understand harm reduction, experiences, and helping to inform policy. Right now, they've launched a new one and they're looking at young people in Scotland very specifically because they were very much underrepresented in the last project. And so right now they're looking at 16 to 30-year-olds. It has launched. If people want to share their story, or if you know people in your services that would be able to take part, all the information will be linked in the presentation, but also you can go to the Benzo Research Project website and get more information there. Okay, gabapentinoids. Gabapentinoids, or gabapentin and pregabalin, were mentioned very briefly at the very start. So, what are they? What do they do? They are prescribed medications, although we are seeing them and hearing about them more and more with people taking them outside of that. When we are hearing about them, we tend to, at least in Scotland, from the alerts that I'm hearing about and from where I'm hearing about them, we're hearing about diverted medications a lot of the time, but that doesn't mean that there aren't fake versions. But right now we're hearing mostly about diverted medications. So what that means is, exactly as it sounds, medications that have been diverted from legitimate sources. There may be counterfeits, so it's still important. I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record here, but it's important to keep in mind that it could be a fake version or could be a counterfeit. So drug checking, start low, go slow is important. What are they? They're generally used for either pain management, nerve pain management, epilepsy, or complex neurological conditions. They can or have been reported to reduce tolerance to opioids or help manage withdrawals from opioids. And so some people have taken them for that reason. However, we don't know if that's why they're being taken or whether they're being taken to help manage pain or other things that are coming from long-term conditions as well. We don't know. But certainly the medications are certainly being diverted in part. Withdrawal should be managed and supported. Gabapentinoids can have very complex withdrawals, and they have adverse side effects that can be quite challenging for people. Everything from coordination to panic, depersonalization, dizziness, tiredness, visual disturbances. The side effects from tolerance, it can include things like tremors, insomnia. So I think if we have people that are taking gabapentinoids and then have to withdraw suddenly, there is risk to their health and their mental health and well-being. So keeping that in mind, if somebody has to suddenly withdraw from them, it can be quite challenging, quite dangerous for them as well. Same with benzodiazepines. Drug-related death, we've discussed this earlier on. We see gabapentinoids come up somewhat regularly within our drug-related death statistics across the UK. I'm not going to go on about it for too long, but it is important to keep in mind. And as I was saying, withdrawal. Benzodiazepines, one of the things that we do talk about quite a lot is to do with the need to taper off. They are incredibly dangerous if there is a sudden stop from benzodiazepines, and it can take quite a long period of time. There is services that support with this. GPs, certainly in Scotland, will support with a benzodiazepine withdrawal. Some GPs will actually help manage that through diazepam and replacement. However, it can take 6 months or longer as somebody has to go through that tapering off and trauma-informed approach, ideally. Gabapentinoids, it can be weeks. It depends as well if there's other things in place. Again, trauma-informed ideally, as well as they reduce the dose that they were on. Gabapentinoids can be quite a high dose as well. Benzodiazepines, if it's street benzos, it's unclear what the dose was, so it's important for somebody to really be considering where that person is and having a really empathetic and informed discussion with them around these drugs. And I will pass over to Morgan to talk about nitazines.
So, if you can raise your hand in the Teams meeting like this, have you heard of nitazines before? Raise your hand if so. just so that we can get an idea. Okay, that's quite a lot of people. That's about what, maybe a third of us, a half, a third. That's quite a lot. Netizines are actually probably one of the most important drug trends that we're seeing at the moment, and so it's really important we know what they are. Just a question for everybody then. What do we know about fentanyl? Fire in the chat what you know about fentanyl. Because while these may seem, maybe you've not heard of netizines, many of you will probably have heard of fentanyl before. It's something that we've heard a lot about in the news. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about it too. The other day, I was told by somebody that fentanyl is appearing in almost all drug-related deaths in Scotland, which isn't true. But there is a degree of truth within that information. So we're seeing pain relief, someone saying 50 times stronger than heroin. It's a very specific strength, but actually that's correct. 50 times stronger than heroin, fentanyl. Powerful opioid, very strong. A synthetic opioid, there we go. So that's another important thing. It's an opioid that, unlike heroin, isn't produced from poppies and opium, but is produced in a lab synthetically, causing lots of drug-related incidents in the USA, yet very big in America. Is it moving here? That's a good question. Is it? It could be, but we will talk about this in just a second. Yeah, okay, seen lots and lots of information. Brilliant. So we know what fentanyl is. Netizines are a bit like fentanyl. So while America has fentanyl, the UK and Europe, we are seeing netizines. So we are seeing powerful synthetic opioids appearing in the opioid supply and in the benzodiazepine supply. So that's what netizines are. They are powerful synthetic opioids, a little bit like fentanyl. So, okay, so we know that's the case. We know that there's a similarity between netizines and fentanyl. How strong are netizines? I've got a little bit of a quiz for us here, and we're going to do a raise hand thing again, where we're going to go through A, B, C, and D. Now, this may look like a chemistry exam, but I promise you it's simple enough. I'll explain it. So each of these are samples that have been tested by a drug checking facility. You have in blue heroin, and in orange nitazene called metonitazene. Okay, so in grey, you also have a non-psychoactive substance. That means it would have no effect on you if you took it. And we're going to run through each of these samples and we're going to see which would be the strongest if it was taken. So who thinks that A would be the strongest, that A would have the strongest effect? Okay, we've got a few hands there. So mostly heroin, but a little bit of metonitazene. A few people. Who thinks that B would have the strongest effect? A bit of heroin, tiny bit of metonitazene, and lots of non-psychoactive substance. Okay. How about C? Pure heroin, 100% heroin, very strong on its own. A very, very pure sample of heroin, probably medical grade, in order for it to be that pure. That's not something that we would pretty much ever see on the street. That is very unusual. Okay. What then about D, which is vastly non-psychoactive, with a tiny bit of heroin and then a little slither of metonitazene? Yes. So a lot of people are saying D, and the answer is D. And why the answer is D is because that amount of metonitazine there, that tiny little orange circle, is equivalent to that amount of heroin. They're very strong nitazines. And actually, like fentanyl, that nitazine, metonitazine, is 50 times as strong as heroin. But there are stronger nitazines, and we have been seeing things all the way up to etonitazine appearing in the Scottish drug supply, which is really worrying, of course. If you're somebody who, like most people who take heroin, most people who take drugs, you're looking for a consistent experience. You're looking for something which gives you the effects that you want, the pleasurable effects, the numbing effects, the relaxing effects, for example, but not so much that you're in danger. You're not going to be looking for the most powerful thing you can find. You're going to be looking for the thing that's going to get you to the level that you're used to. Now, if you've been taking heroin for 20, 30, 20 years, let's say 10 years, however long, and you know how much heroin you would usually have with a bit of margin for failure, and then suddenly there's a nitazene in your heroin supply, that's going to throw off your calculated kind of dose. That's going to completely throw you off and potentially put you into an overdose or a drug emergency or another situation that you presumably really wouldn't want to be in. Now, it's really scary looking at these numbers, but the key thing is that ultimately the high strengths, the higher strength they are, it becomes meaningless at a certain point. Regardless, they're dangerous. We know that. So what can we do? Key thing is, if possible, get drugs checked. So if you are somebody who is accessing opioids, or you work with somebody who's accessing opioids or benzodiazepines, try to get them to get their batch tested. Just a small amount of their drugs sent to Wedanos can provide information. That might not always be possible or realistic to ask of people, especially people who are in very, very unstable living conditions or situations. And so the other advice we would suggest is start low and go slow and avoid taking drugs alone. So if people are taking opioids, if they are taking benzos, it's better if they take a test dose first to see how it affects them. And that way, if they're taking it one by one in turn, it means that if something goes wrong, then the other person who's hopefully with them can administer naloxone and phone an ambulance. And we spoke about naloxone before. And naloxone is a life-saving opioid reversal medication that can remove the opioid drugs from the opioid receptors in your brain for up to 30 minutes. Now, this is usually enough to restore breathing. Doesn't always bring someone back to consciousness, but it can do. And the key thing that naloxone is used for is keeping someone alive for an ambulance to arrive. And you can get training from many local services. I know that in Edinburgh we provide training, and there's also Scottish Families Affected by Drugs and Alcohol. It's worth contacting your local services and finding out where you can get it. As with naloxone, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Now, in Scotland, it's so important that we say we are only seeing nitazines in the heroin and in the benzodiazepine supply. We're not seeing it in MDMA, we're not seeing it in cocaine, we're not seeing it in ketamine. If there are any incidents like this in Scotland, they have either been unreported or there's been a misunderstanding about what's happened, but it is quite limited in its presence. I think it's always worth that we raise that because there's a lot of panic around fentanyl and nitazines, but it's not the case that we're seeing it everywhere and in everything. And now we're going to talk about something which relates to nitazines, but does fall into a different category of drugs. So these are sedative drugs, so they're not opioids, but they have been appearing in the same places that we've been seeing nitazines. And I'm going to hand over to Sarah for that.
I get all the ones that are really fun for me to try and pronounce. So it's fine. Xylosine's fine. It's just when we get past that one. Okay, right. So xylosine. Xylosine people have heard of, I'm assuming. Medetomidine and detomidine. That's where we get into slightly newer territory, but bear with me. We will get there. I'll explain. So xylazine, sedative drug, that came out a few years ago. It didn't come out a few years ago, but that's when we started to hear about it within the markets that we work within. So that's when we started to hear about it within heroin and benzodiazepine markets, within the street benzo market, as a contaminant. We found it within the US. We heard about it in Scotland. We heard about it in parts of the UK. And obviously, it created the danger of potentially fatal and near fatal overdoses. Now, the one thing that we have found more recently is that occasionally it will show up again, and we are hearing a little bit more about it just now. However, it kind of went quiet for about a year. So there's a period where it was everywhere, then it went quiet, and now we're hearing a little bit about it again at the moment. So xylazine, it's having a little bit of a sort of resurgence, a little bit. At the moment, people are talking about it again. We're not seeing it in drug checking results, but we're hearing about it at the moment. Now, xylazine, for people that need a little bit of a refresher, I know I certainly did. It is a sedative. It was mostly being found within veterinary. Apparently, it's been found in positive tests in Cambridge, so that's good to know. Sedative, mostly found within veterinary, obviously until we were hearing about it. In terms of injecting, we are aware, and a lot of people are aware of the abscesses and tissue necrosis. Not necessarily at the point of injection, but certainly that was one of the telltale signs that we did become aware of, and that people were complaining of the smell when it was being burned, that it had a sort of plasticky or a fishy smell when it was being heated. So that was quite obvious to people that were burning or burning up what they were taking. And that was the things that we did know as a sort of baseline. So in terms of harm reduction, to be mindful, to try and take care of any wounds, to speak to their IEP provider if they had any concerns about wounds, get them seen to as soon as possible, and not let anything that looks suspicious in terms of abscesses, let them sit for too long, get them seen to, and that was our sort of fundamental harm reduction. If something didn't feel right, if something didn't smell right, to maybe think about whether they need to take that or whether it is possible, if they have any concerns of it containing xylazine, to maybe not take it. There is xylazine test strips that they can actually have within services. So if you are aware of it within your area, to maybe check whether that is something that you can provide. We did have, and I can double check what the efficacy was for the xylazine test strips, but I'm pretty sure they were pretty reliable in terms of confirming. Obviously, it doesn't check for anything else apart from confirming whether xylazine is present. However, if that is something that is within your area, it may be worth having xylazine test strips available for people. But that's what we had around xylazine. The other sedatives that we are aware of being within our market is medetomidine. I have put a pronunciation guide because that took me far too long to learn how to say, and detomidine. Key points: there has been 14 drug checking samples across the UK by Weddinos within the last, I think, since November time, or late last year, November, December time. They're found in samples where the purchase intent was heroin, synthetic opioids, or benzodiazepine. There was one nitazine, I think that was the purchase intent. However, that's where we have found medetomidine so far. And the other thing, which is really important to note, is there is a drug called, okay, here we go, atapamazole. I'll learn how to say that better. Which, when we were speaking to vets, surprisingly, they told us that this drug can be used to support in cases of overdose. Now, they have it in supply because in cases of overdose with midetamidine, that's when they use it. But actually, it is something that can be provided in pharmacies and hospitals because it is something that is generally prescribed for other reasons. I think it's generally erectile dysfunction. However, it does support with a midetamidine overdose. So that's something to keep in mind if that is a concern. Obviously, 14 drug checking samples. As we said earlier, drug checking doesn't mean that everybody's getting everything. Oh, somebody came through in the chat. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat box. I don't know if that was a direct question to me or not, but I'm not sure. But yeah, if there's any, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, if there are any concerns about it, if there's obviously drug checking results, not everybody will get everything tested. We don't know how prevalent it actually is, or whether this is just the fact there's only small samples of it, or whether there's just small batches. It's unclear. But it could be that there are many, it's more prevalent. Unclear at the moment. It could just be that this is quite a small thing. In terms of what we do know, it is a sedative, or these two drugs are sedatives. So harm reduction information that I have gathered end of last year was this. A number of people may vomit within minutes of injection, regurgitation and upset stomach. So recovery position, or being in a position where you could vomit if you are injecting, is advised, just so that there's not a risk of choking. Pregnant people should avoid it. It causes contractions and can decrease fetal blood pressure, specifically midetamidine, but detamidine obviously runs a risk as well. It causes hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, so diabetics should avoid it as well, or be mindful of insulin levels. It can cause abnormal heart arrhythmia as well as heart rate slowing, as it's a sedative. Temperature fluctuation have been noted, so keeping warm would be something to think about, especially if taking it outside or with other drugs that may affect your temperature or body temperature regulation. Maybe less aware of the cold, but you would still be experiencing it. Also can cause blood pressure, low blood pressure, so being aware of that and avoid standing up too quickly, or being with other people in case you feel lightheaded or could fall. So that was the general harm reduction information that was gathered. A number of that was confirmed through speaking with professionals that work with individuals that obviously are provided or given midetamidine. Legislation updates. Some of these are new. Xylazine was obviously controlled 2025 as a Class C, but 2026, so actually within a very short space of time, the 16th of January this year, detamidine will be controlled under the Misuse of Drugs Act Class C, and then information on what that actually means. And I will hand over to Morgan.
Cannabis, THC, and synthetic cannabinoid receptor agonists. Really, really interesting subject. Lots to say on it and not much time left. So, unfortunately, we can't cover it today. However, on the 20th of April, 420 for those who know, we will be delivering another session with the Drug Education Forum. So please do come along if you can. We will be talking about cannabis, what it is, how purity has changed over time. We'll also be talking about how it's taken, how these different methods of consumption compare, what synthetic cannabinoids are, and finally, we'll be talking about the potential harms of cannabis on its own, and going into a little bit of harm reduction. If you cannot make this session, we are also running a 2-hour session online in 2 weeks' time. That is possible to join. We do have limited spaces, so if you are really keen, get signed up there. If not, we'll see you on the 20th of April for that one there. And that brings us pretty much to the end of our drugs information for today. We do have time for some Q&A type stuff, I think, Sarah, if this would be the best time to do it. We do have more information in the slides about our drop-in and about our digital drop-in if you want to access them. These slides will go out. There will be loads of info about resources that you can find on the Crew website that we can get printed and delivered, or you can have these downloaded and shared online for free. We also have links to our socials with information about how you can get updates from Crew. We have a very brilliant newsletter. Wonder who writes that. And also just a few information, little bits about our sponsors. And if you would like to leave us some evaluation to let us know how we did today, then you can scan that QR code, let us know what you liked about the session, let us know if you feel like your drug knowledge has been improved, and this will go to the Scottish Government and help us to continue to be funded to deliver sessions like we have been delivering today.